Heavy rain fell against the large glass windows of Terminal 4 at JFK International Airport. Inside, the departures board showed Flight 782 to London Heathrow was still on time. The flight crew had checked in. Passengers were waiting for the gate to open for boarding. In the cockpit of the Summit Airways Boeing 787, Captain Andrew Collins sat in the left-hand seat. He went over the pre-flight checklist on his company-issued tablet. His watch showed 8:15 in the morning. Scheduled departure was 9 o'clock. Andrew Collins had been with Summit Airways for 30 years. He was used to people waiting for him. He was used to his decisions not being questioned. The cockpit door opened. A draft of humid air from the jet bridge blew in. First Officer Olivia Carter entered. Her uniform crisp. Her hair pulled back neatly. She stowed her flight bag in the compartment behind the right-hand seat. "I'm First Officer Olivia Carter. I've been assigned to this flight." Andrew Collins didn't shake her hand. He glanced at the 3 stripes on her epaulets, then looked back down at the screen in front of him. Crew scheduling sent the wrong person. Olivia Carter kept her voice even. The roster was updated at 4 this morning. First Officer David Miller is sick. Andrew Collins swiveled his chair to face her. "I know David Miller. He knows how I operate. I'm rated for this airframe. I've been flying this type for 3 years. Andrew Collins stood up, pulling the right-hand seat back, blocking access to the control panel. "This isn't a training run." Olivia Carter looked at him directly. "I'm not in training." Andrew Collins shook his head. "Summit Airways isn't a social experiment." He pointed to the center control screen. "Don't touch the flight management system." For a brief moment, the two of them stood facing each other in the narrow space of the cockpit. Outside the door, ground crew moved about in the rain. Boarding was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. Olivia Carter took out her phone and checked the time. "We have passengers waiting. I'm ready to start the pre-flight check." Andrew Collins crossed his arms. "This plane isn't leaving the gate until I have a real pilot." At the end of the jet bridge, a technician checking the nose gear heard the comment through the open cockpit door. He paused for a second, then went back to his work. In the cabin, Lisa Munro, the lead flight attendant, got a call from the cockpit telling her to put a hold on boarding. She looked at the cabin clock. Passengers were starting to line up at the counter. Olivia Carter took a step back so she wasn't touching the pulled-out chair. "Are you refusing to fly with me?" Andrew Collins answered without hesitation. "That's right." "On what grounds?" "I have the experience to know who's a good fit." Olivia Carter gave a slight nod. "Noted." She turned and left the cockpit. The door closed behind her. Andrew Collins sat back down in the left-hand seat and pushed the intercom button. He told Lisa Munro to keep the passengers at the gate. He said there was a staffing adjustment. Outside the gate, passengers started asking about the delay. Daniel Brooks, a regional manager for Summit Airways, was in Terminal 1, a few minutes away, when he got a call from Central Operations. Olivia Carter stood near a window, looking out at the fuselage of the plane in the rain. She opened a secure contact list on her phone and called William Carter, the chairman of the board. "We have a problem." On the other end of the line, William Carter listened to the details. Captain Andrew Collins was refusing to work with his duly assigned first officer. He asked if there were witnesses. Olivia Carter's answer was brief. She requested that Daniel Brooks come to the gate to witness what happened next. In the cockpit, Andrew Collins adjusted his tie in the reflection of a dark instrument panel. He checked his watch. Boarding was 10 minutes late. He spoke to Lisa Munro over the radio. "Let the passengers on the plane. You just told me to hold them. I want them to hear the reason why." The cockpit door opened again as Olivia Carter walked back toward the plane. The first passenger was stepping through the cabin door. Andrew Collins stood blocking the aisle just ahead. He held the PA microphone but didn't key it yet. He looked toward the cockpit door where Olivia Carter stood. Her hands clasped behind her back. The rain continued to fall steadily outside the windows. Boarding continued. Passengers kept filing past Captain Andrew Collins and finding their seats. The sound of seatbelts being pulled across seats. The click of overhead bins shutting. No one spoke loudly. Andrew Collins stood in the forward aisle. The microphone was in his hand. But he still hadn't keyed it. He waited for the cabin to fill up more. Once the first few rows were settled, he spoke. "This flight is delayed because I have refused to work with an unqualified first officer." A few heads turned. A phone went up. Then another. Olivia Carter stepped out from the cockpit doorway. She stood a few feet from him, not moving any closer. "I was properly assigned to this flight." Andrew Collins didn't look at her. "I'm responsible for 300 people. I decide who sits in the right seat." No one clapped. No one objected. Just the steady hum of the air conditioning. At the cabin door, Daniel Brooks appeared. His coat was still wet. He walked straight to the front, stopping between Andrew Collins and Olivia Carter. "Captain Andrew Collins, take a step back." Andrew Collins looked at Daniel Brooks like he'd never seen him before. "I am in command of this flight." Daniel Brooks's reply was short. "Not anymore." "You're not." Andrew Collins froze. Olivia Carter unpinned the pilot's badge from her jacket. From an inside pocket, she took out a black, metal-trimmed executive card. She didn't hold it up high, just at chest level. "I'm Olivia Carter." The cabin went completely silent. Someone in the front row whispered, "The CEO." Andrew Collins gave a short laugh. "I wasn't informed." Olivia Carter stared straight ahead. "You just publicly refused a duly assigned pilot in front of your passengers." Andrew Collins spoke slower than before. "I was protecting the flight." Daniel Brooks took half a step forward. "You just violated operational regulations and company policy." No one interrupted. A passenger in the middle of the cabin raised their phone higher, adjusting the angle. Andrew Collins took the microphone from his hand and set it on an empty seat. "You can't do this right here." Olivia Carter answered immediately. "I can." Nothing more needed to be said. Daniel Brooks held out his hand in front of Andrew Collins. "Your badge." Andrew Collins stood still for a few seconds. He looked down the cabin. The screens of cell phones lit up in a small row above the passengers' heads. He unpinned his badge and handed it to Daniel Brooks without looking anyone in the eye. 2 airport security officers were standing at the cabin door. They didn't touch him, just waited. Andrew Collins walked past them and left the plane. The cabin was still silent. Olivia Carter turned toward Lisa Monroe and the 3 flight attendants standing against the wall of the forward galley. "When the cockpit environment is compromised, regulations require a report." Lisa Monroe looked down at the floor. "We were following the captain's orders." Olivia Carter's tone didn't change. "When that order violates regulations, you have the right to refuse." A young flight attendant spoke softly. "We didn't think we had that right." Daniel Brooks looked at the flight attendants. "You are all relieved of duty for this flight, pending an investigation." No one objected. One of them let out a heavy sigh. In the middle of the cabin, a passenger said, just loud enough to be heard, "This is gonna be on the news tonight." Olivia Carter picked up the microphone. "All passengers, please deplane temporarily. We will be bringing in a new flight crew and will depart as soon as possible. Compensation will be provided in accordance with our policy." There were no boos. No one asked for a refund. Passengers started standing up, row by row. Phones were still recording as they walked out onto the jet bridge. Daniel Brooks spoke quietly, just loud enough for Olivia Carter to hear. "The backup crew is on its way. About 40 minutes." Olivia Carter nodded. Prepare a report and save all internal video. A ground crew member at the cabin door handed Daniel Brooks a small device. Someone out there sent an audio file. Daniel Brooks glanced at it, then put it in his pocket. Olivia Carter didn't ask any questions. The cabin slowly emptied. Only a few seats in the back were still occupied. The sound of footsteps on the aisle carpet was steady, unhurried. Outside, rain was still falling on the fuselage. The lights on the wing reflected the gray morning light. Daniel Brooks turned to Olivia Carter. The media's already started posting about it. Olivia Carter looked out the window for a second, then turned back to the cockpit. The left seat was empty. The right one was still pushed out of place. She reached out and pushed the seat back onto its track. She didn't say anything. The cabin was empty. The left seat was still warm. Olivia Carter sat down in the captain's seat. A few minutes later, Captain David from the backup crew walked in. He put his bag down and quickly checked the control panel. Pre-flight complete. We're departing. 40 minutes later. Flight 782 left the gate. The chatter was gone. The passengers sat quietly, their seatbelts fastened. As the plane ascended, the cabin settled back into the routine of any other flight. Meanwhile, Andrew Collins was sitting in the area outside security. His badge had been confiscated. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The video from the cabin had been posted online. The clip of him saying, "This aircraft doesn't move," was being shared everywhere. An audio recording from a ground technician had also surfaced. 2 days later, Andrew Collins filed a lawsuit against Summit Airways. He was represented by attorney Marcus Hale. The suit alleged wrongful termination, defamation of character, and a breach of the union agreement. It sought $50 million in damages. In a conference room at Summit Airways' Manhattan headquarters, Michael Grant, the chief legal counsel, placed a file folder in front of Olivia Carter. He's demanding a hearing under his employment contract. Olivia Carter opened the file, turning the pages one by one. Prepare our response and start an internal investigation. Michael Grant looked up. To what extent? His entire 10 years flying international. 3 days later, the internal audit team came back with the fuel data, weight and balance sheets, and Andrew Collins's company card history. The numbers didn't add up. Michael Grant kept it brief. There's a recurring discrepancy between the amount of fuel ordered and the amount actually used. Olivia Carter didn't interrupt. That difference was converted into a third-party credit in Bangkok. Michael Grant placed another thin stack of papers on the table, and there were false adjustments on the load and balance sheets. Olivia Carter looked down at the printout. That would directly affect takeoff calculations. Michael Grant nodded. Enough to turn the file over to the feds. That same afternoon, attorney Marcus Hale's office received a notice requesting a meeting. Andrew Collins showed up in a new suit. He was convinced the company was going to offer a settlement. The conference room door opened. Olivia Carter walked in, accompanied by Michael Grant and 2 federal agents. Marcus Hale shot to his feet. This is a settlement negotiation. Olivia Carter set a file folder down on the table. Here's the proof. A federal agent walked over to Andrew Collins. You're under arrest for financial fraud and falsifying flight data. Marcus Hale glanced at the documents, then took a step back. I'm withdrawing as counsel. Andrew Collins tried to say something, but no one responded. He was escorted out of the room. His lawsuit was dismissed. The criminal case was moved to federal court. The media coverage was non-stop. The cabin video played on a loop on every news channel. 6 months later, Andrew Collins was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud and falsifying operational data. His pilot's license was revoked. He lost his pension under the gross misconduct clause. Summit Airways issued a new policy, the Carter Compliance Rule. It gave all crew members, regardless of rank, the right to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. All flight crews were now required to verbally confirm the code of professional conduct before every flight. Lisa Monroe returned to the company after the investigation, but in a new role, training staff on reporting accountability. One full morning, Olivia Carter was back in the left seat of a brand new 787. Captain David was in the right seat, ready for pushback. Ready. The plane pushed back from the gate. No audience, no phones in the air, just the checklist and the open runway ahead. As the plane lifted off the runway, everything worked exactly the way it was supposed to. This story doesn't end with a public firing. It ends when the internal audit is seen through to the end, and all the data is reconciled. If it were you, would you take the quick settlement to avoid the mess? Or would you dig deeper and accept the bigger risk? And if you want to hear more stories about power, procedure, and the price you pay for crossing the line, subscribe to the Black CEO Tales channel.